An empire once tried to outlaw all sound but its own commands. This is the story of the Clocktower Pact, a secret alliance forged in the medieval shadows between bellsmiths and orators to fight this silence. You will learn how a clandestine agreement defied absolute power using coded bells and whispered speeches. How did artisans embed secret messages into bronze? And what happened when the masters of speech were forced underground? This forgotten struggle reveals a powerful truth about unity and the unbreakable human spirit. What does it take for a silenced people to find their voice again? The empire's reach finally stretched into the very air people breathed. Under the clear, cold logic of Chancellor Valerius, new edicts swept across the land, declaring all bells and public speeches illegal unless they came directly from the state. The imperial seal was not just on parchment, it was stamped onto sound itself. One morning, the great bells in the city steeples did not ring for the dawn. The market criers who once announced the price of wheat and the arrival of ships fell silent. Public squares, once buzzing with debate and storytellers' voices, became unnervingly still. This was not peace, it was a void. Chancellor Valerius and his advisors believed that uncontrolled sound was the seed of uncontrolled thought. They feared the way a ringing bell could summon a community, or how a fiery speech could ignite a rebellion. So they sought to sever those connections, replacing the chaotic chorus of daily life with a single, approved imperial voice. The silence they imposed was a weapon, meticulously designed to isolate people, to make them feel alone and powerless. Historical records from the time speak of a deep confusion settling over the populace, a collective despair as the familiar rhythms of life vanished. In this oppressive quiet, the very idea of community began to fray. It was within this suffocating atmosphere that a desperate, unspoken question began to form in the hearts of the silenced. How could they possibly answer back? Deep in the forgotten woods and beneath the cobblestone streets, the bellsmiths' hammers began to sing a new kind of song. Their great forges, once proud centers of light and noise, had been dismantled and moved into shadows. They worked now in forest clearings under the cover of night, or in damp cellars where the only light came from the molten metal's glow. The empire had silenced their public work, but it could not extinguish their craft. Their challenge was monumental: to create instruments of communication hiding in plain sight, tools that would sing only to those who knew how to listen. Guild records, carefully hidden in false bottom chests, detail their ingenious methods. They began experimenting with special alloys, blending copper with precise amounts of tin and even silver to create bells with unique harmonic signatures, tones no imperial bell possessed. A bell cast for a remote village chapel, for instance, might be tuned to resonate at a frequency that carried for miles, a specific pitch that meant imperial tax collectors were approaching. Another, hanging in a town square, might have a second, almost imperceptible overtone that signaled a safe meeting place after dark. This was not mere metalwork, it was a form of acoustic cryptography. The most celebrated example was Master Bellsmith Alaric, commissioned by the Empire itself to cast a celebratory bell for a new administrative building. He secretly designed it to be a vessel of defiance. When the great bronze bell was finally rung, its official tone was deep and solemn, exactly as ordered. But the way the sound decayed, the sequence of lingering harmonics that followed, perfectly mimicked the opening notes of a popular folk melody, a song about a harvest homecoming. To the imperial ear, it was a stately chime. To the silenced populace, it was a rallying cry, a musical signal that spread from one knowing listener to another, rekindling a sense of shared identity. The Bellsmiths had turned their greatest creations into dual beings, public monuments of compliance that were, in their very soul, secret instruments of unity. Their technical genius proved that oppression could not stifle creativity. It could only force it to evolve into something more subtle and more powerful. While the Bellsmiths worked in fire and metal, the masters of speech faced a different kind of challenge. They had to rebuild their entire art from the ground up, moving from the grand stage of the public square to the hushed secrecy of abandoned mills and moonlit forest clearings. Under the cloak of night, with lookouts posted for Imperial patrols, these gatherings became the soul of the silent rebellion. The orators could no longer speak plainly, so they learned to speak in code. They wove intricate allegorical tales where a greedy dragon hoarding gold was not a mythical beast, but the imperial treasury. Stories of clever foxes outwitting hounds were not simple fables, but detailed lessons on evading the city watch. Their entire history and hopes were folded into these narratives, making every story a map and every character a symbol. Recovered scrolls, carefully preserved in clay jars, contain the words of the legendary Ilara the Silver-Tongued. She never spoke of rebellion outright. Instead, she told a parable of a great, ancient oak tree whose leaves had been stolen by a perpetual winter. She described how the tree's deep, hidden roots continued to gather strength, waiting for the right season to bloom once more. Her message was not one of immediate violence, but of profound, unshakable resilience. It was a call to endure, to nurture that inner strength, and to be ready. These messages needed to be both unforgettable and utterly deniable. To coordinate their efforts, the orators leveraged the very fabric of daily life. A simple children's rhyme sung in a courtyard, one about a blackbird singing at a certain hour, could discreetly signal the time of the next clandestine meeting. A baker's call about the day's special loaf might indicate which safe house was active. They turned the mundane rhythms of society into a sophisticated, covert communication network, hiding their plans in plain sight. These secret meetings, filled with coded stories and whispered strategies, became the true heartbeat of the resistance. They were not just sharing information, they were carefully tending a flame, ensuring that the art of free speech and the very idea of a shared public voice would not be extinguished by the imperial silence. The old clock tower stood as a silent sentinel, its gears stilled by imperial decree, but on a moonless night, a different kind of mechanism stirred within its stone heart. Under the perfect cover of a scheduled maintenance inspection, the first historic meeting took place. Lookouts were positioned on the winding stairs, their ears straining for the boot falls of the city watch, while inside the chamber of weights and pendulums, whispered conversations hung in the dusty air. Bellsmith Gregor, his hands still stained with soot from a hidden forge, stood opposite Orator Lysandra, whose voice was hoarse from speaking only in cautious tones. Their initial distrust was as tangible as the cold stone around them. Gregor saw the orators as reckless, their words too fleeting to build anything solid. Lysandra viewed the Bellsmiths as stubborn artisans, too bound to their heavy, immovable creations. Yet, as they spoke, a profound understanding dawned. Gregor gestured to the frozen gears around them, a complex machine rendered useless because one part could not move without the others. He explained how a single, perfectly cast bell could be silenced, but a network of them, each with a unique secret voice, could never be fully controlled. Lysandra, in turn, spoke of the orator's own network, a living tapestry of stories and signals woven through the population, invisible to the Empire's eyes. They realized their strengths were not just complementary, they were symbiotic. The bells could carry the orators' coded messages across vast distances, while the orators could give those chimes their true meaning, turning abstract sounds into calls for action and comfort. Historical accounts suggest it was Lysandra who first articulated the core principle, her whisper cutting through the tension. "A bell without a message is just noise," she said. But a message without a voice is just a thought. Together, they could be a chorus. In that moment, distrust evaporated into a fierce, mutual respect. Using a small vial of ink and a scrap of parchment pulled from the clock's own maintenance ledger, they drafted their agreement. The words were simple but profound, a vow of mutual aid and shared purpose. They hid the document within the clock's housing, a secret heart for the silent tower. This was the birth of the Clocktower Pact, the moment two separate streams of defiance merged into a single, unstoppable river, proving that unity could be forged even in the deepest silence. The document hidden within the clock tower was more than a promise. It was an operational blueprint for a new kind of rebellion. Its core principles were threefold, each designed to create a system that was far greater than the sum of its parts. The first principle was the Pact's very lifeblood, a mandate for a seamless system of communication. Bellsmiths were tasked with creating a lexicon of sound, a series of specific chimes, tolling patterns, and harmonic sequences that could be heard across valleys and through city walls. A double chime from the western bell might mean Imperial patrols were changing their route. A rapid, light ringing from a chapel bell could signal that a shipment of forbidden supplies had arrived safely. But these sounds were just raw data. It was the Orators who gave them meaning and urgency. They would take these auditory signals and weave them into their coded stories and public announcements, transforming a simple chime into a detailed instruction or a vital piece of news, amplifying the message through the one medium the Empire could not fully control, the human voice. This intricate network needed protection, which led directly to the Pact's second principle, mutual aid and sanctuary. They established a web of safe houses, often in the very bell towers they used for signals, which provided perfect vantage points for lookouts. Orators, with their intimate knowledge of back alleys and forgotten paths, became the architects of escape routes, guiding pursued members to safety. A baker, who was also a Pact sympathizer, might hear a specific bell pattern and know to leave his back door unlocked for the night. A weaver might see a certain colored thread tied to a market stall, a silent message from an orator that a safe house was active. This principle ensured that the Pact was not just an idea, but a living, breathing community that could shield its own from the Empire's grasp, making the entire resistance resilient and difficult to dismantle. Finally, understanding that their struggle might be long, the Pact committed to a third, crucial principle, the preservation of knowledge. Both bellsmiths and orators meticulously documented their activities. Bellsmiths kept hidden ledgers detailing their secret casting techniques and the specific codes etched into the soul of each bell. Orators transcribed their most powerful allegories and the key to their verbal ciphers. These records were sealed in clay jars and buried, or hidden within the hollowed-out stones of the very towers they sought to liberate. They were not writing for their own glory, but for a future they might not live to see, ensuring that even if they were captured, their methods, their stories, and their legacy of defiance would endure. These three principles created a framework so robust that the Empire, for all its power, was fighting a ghost, a movement that lived in the air, in the stories, and in the very heart of the community it sought to silence. A bell's voice is heavy and permanent, cast in bronze and meant to echo for generations. It was the sound of the community itself, a deep, resonant promise that they were still here, that their collective identity could not be melted down. The spoken word, in contrast, was nimble and alive. It was the sharp, adaptable tool of reason and persuasion, capable of weaving new ideas in the moment. The genius of the Clocktower Pact was in weaving these two forces together into a single, unbreakable cord. This symbolic fusion meant their resistance spoke to the heart and the mind simultaneously, creating a movement that was almost impossible for the authorities to pin down. How do you arrest a feeling evoked by a chime or outlaw a story that changes with every telling? The Empire could silence a man, but it could not silence the meaning people found in the sound he helped create. Consider the ritual of the dawn chime. In villages under tight imperial control, a specific, complex sequence of bells would ring just before sunrise, a pattern officially dismissed as a quirky local tradition. But the Orators gave that sequence its true power. They wove tales around it, explaining that the 5 distinct tones represented the 5 founding virtues of their ancestors, virtues like integrity and mutual aid. They turned a simple auditory signal into a daily reminder of a time before imperial rule, a political message embedded so deeply into the fabric of daily life that it became as natural as the dawn itself. For an illiterate farmer tending his fields, the sound was a visceral comfort, a deep-seated feeling of belonging. For an educated merchant in the town square, the same chime, coupled with the Orator's allegory, was a logical argument for self-governance. The Pact's methods ensured their message reached everyone on their own terms. This synergy transformed abstract concepts into tangible acts. The idea of freedom was no longer just a whispered dream. It was the physical sensation of a bell's vibration in your chest. The concept of unity was not a vague ideal. It was the shared understanding in a neighbor's eyes when a particular chime rang out, signaling that a safe passage was open. The Empire's enforcers were trained to crush overt dissent, to find pamphlets and break up crowds, but they were utterly confounded by a rebellion that lived in the air and in stories told to children. They could not confiscate a melody from people's memories, nor could they stop a parable about a stubborn seed from taking root in the imagination. The symbolic power of sound married to speech created a defense that was as fluid as water, bending around every attempt to crush it. This was the Pact's ultimate strength, proving that the most resilient forms of defiance are those that speak a language beyond words alone. The Empire was not blind to the whispers on the wind. Chancellor Valerius understood that a new kind of dissent was taking root, one that standard patrols and edicts could not easily uproot. His response was a chilling escalation, a two-pronged assault designed to strangle the rebellion in its cradle. First came the Sound Wardens, a new branch of the Imperial Guard selected for their acute hearing and unwavering loyalty. These men were not mere soldiers, they were acoustic hunters. They would stand for hours in town squares, their eyes closed, mapping the soundscape of the city, searching for any bell chime that deviated from the state-approved monotone. They carried intricate tuning forks and resonance charts, treating every unexpected sound as a potential cryptographic key to be cracked. To complement this technological hunt, the Empire wove a web of human betrayal. They established vast informant networks, offering coin and clemency to those willing to report suspicious activity. A neighbor with a grudge, a merchant facing debt, even a frightened parent could become the Empire's eyes and ears. This created a culture of deep paranoia, where a misplaced word or a knowing glance could lead to a midnight arrest. The Orators' circles, which relied on trust, now faced an invisible enemy hiding in plain sight. Propaganda posters appeared on every corner, depicting the Clocktower Pact not as freedom fighters, but as dangerous anarchists who sought to bring chaos and ruin to a peaceful, orderly society. They were painted as troublemakers who would see children go hungry and cities burn, all for their own selfish pride. This was a masterstroke of psychological warfare, an attempt to turn the very people the Pact sought to protect against them. The Empire also turned to technological suppression. On the few bells they allowed to remain functional, Imperial engineers installed heavy lead collars, resonance dampeners that muffled the sound and stripped it of its complex harmonics. A once proud bell that could call a valley to celebration was reduced to a dull, localized thud, its voice trapped and crippled. In the halls of records, scribes worked tirelessly not to document history but to erase it. Any mention of legendary orators, any record of guild agreements, any song or story that smacked of local pride was systematically scraped from parchment and burned. The Empire sought to create a cultural vacuum, a present untethered from a rebellious past. This oppressive pressure created an atmosphere of constant hair-trigger peril. Guild records tell of a very close call in the northern town of Oakhaven. A bellsmith named Cale had a hidden workshop in a cellar beneath his bakery. The operation was secure for years until a new apprentice, a young man desperate to pay off his family's imperial taxes, reported the strange, late-night furnace sounds to a sound warden. The wardens descended on the bakery at dawn. Cale and his fellows had only moments to react. They doused the forge, hid the unfinished bell core under a pile of flour sacks, and scattered into the streets just as the Imperial Guards broke down the door. They found a warm bakery and nothing more. The evidence vanished. The traitorous apprentice was never seen again, a silent warning from the pact about the price of betrayal. This narrow escape forced the entire network to refine their security, to develop more complex signals for danger, and to trust even fewer people. The Empire's countermeasures were brutal and pervasive, but they also forged the resistance in fire, teaching its members a terrible, valuable lesson in vigilance and pushing their ingenuity to its absolute limits. High above the villages and towns, a silent conversation began to unfold across the rooftops. The pact had woven the region's bell towers into a single, vast instrument, a nervous system for the resistance. Each tower was a link in a chain, its keeper sworn to the cause and trained in a complex, ever-changing language of sound. Every week, a new cipher was distributed, a sheet of coded patterns dictating the meaning behind specific sequences of tolls. A series of 3 rapid chimes from the north, followed by 2 slow, mournful ones from the east, might signal that a key Imperial official was traveling. The direction and timing of the sounds created a map of movement and intention that only the initiated could read. This system was fluid by design, its meanings shifting with the lunar cycles to confound the ever-listening sound wardens. The most vital of these codes was known as the Harvest Code. When the great bell in the central valley rang with a staccato rhythm, like the beating of a frantic heart, it meant Imperial checkpoints had been established on the main roads. In response, a bell from a distant hill would answer with a calm, steady sequence, indicating which forest trails or dry riverbeds were clear for fugitives to use. This acoustic dance, played out across miles, could reroute an entire escape plan in minutes, all while the Empire's soldiers stood oblivious in the streets below. But these bell patterns were only the first half of the message. Their raw data needed translation and distribution, a task that fell to the Orators and their allies. On crowded market days, an orator might pause by a farmer's cart, admiring the apples while casually mentioning that the Western Pass was especially beautiful this time of year. This was not small talk, it was a precise instruction confirming the safe route the bells had just announced. A weaver might tie a specific knot in a displayed tapestry, a silent signal to a passing member that a message had been received. The information flowed from the heights of the towers down into the bustling, everyday life of the people, hidden in plain sight. To connect these isolated cells, the pact relied on a trusted cadre of intermediaries. Traveling merchants, their wagons laden with ordinary goods, became the circulatory system of the rebellion. Hidden in false bottomed chests or sewn into the linings of cloaks were tiny, tightly rolled scrolls. These contained updates to the weekly bell ciphers, transcripts of new allegories from celebrated speakers like Alaric, and intelligence on imperial movements. A spice merchant from the south was not just selling saffron, he was delivering the very words that kept the resistance alive, moving knowledge through imperial barriers as if they were not even there. This entire network, from the bronze bells to the whispered words in the market, demonstrated a profound understanding of power. The Empire controlled the roads and the garrisons, but the Pact commanded the air and the trust of the people. They had turned the landscape itself into a weapon, creating a web of resistance so decentralized and adaptive that cutting one thread only made the others stronger. The silence the Empire had imposed was now filled with a secret, humming life. While the Empire's sound wardens watched the bell towers and the market squares, they often overlooked the quiet spaces in between. The rebellion's deepest roots were often nurtured in the home, a domain where women, operating under the cloak of conventional domesticity, became some of the Pact's most vital and ingenious members. Historical guild ledgers recently re-examined reveal a startling fact. Women made up nearly 1 in 3 of the Pact's sworn members, a silent force that defied the rigid gender roles of their time. Their contributions were not peripheral, they were central to the network's survival, adding a layer of stealth and resilience the Empire never anticipated. Take the story of Anya, recorded in a brewer's coded household accounts. As the wife of a known ale-maker, her comings and goings raised no imperial suspicion. Her cellar, filled with the earthy scent of fermenting grains, became a perfect hiding place for packed meetings, the clatter of barrels masking the sound of whispered strategies. But her true genius lay in her knowledge of herbal lore. Using common plants from her garden, she developed a range of invisible inks. A message written in a tincture of dandelion root would remain utterly blank until gently warmed by a candle's flame. A note inscribed with onion juice would stay invisible until the paper was dusted with fine soot. Her kitchen became a secret laboratory, and her recipes for preserves doubled as formulas for clandestine communication. Then there was Orator Kaelin, who never stood on a crate in the square. Instead, she moved through circles of women, her speeches disguised as domestic advice. While discussing the best way to preserve vegetables for a harsh winter, she would weave in allegories about preserving their community's spirit against the Empire's cold rule. A lesson on mending a torn cloak became a metaphor for repairing the social fabric, each careful stitch representing an act of quiet solidarity. She empowered the women in her circle to become activists within their own households, teaching their children folk songs that contained coded messages and subtly influencing their husbands' views through persuasive, private conversation. These women leveraged their societal invisibility as their greatest asset. A noblewoman's handmaid could overhear crucial state secrets in an unguarded moment and pass them along through the network of servants. A basket weaver could carry forbidden scrolls hidden beneath her wares, her movements dismissed as mundane errands. They proved that the most powerful form of resistance is sometimes the one that goes entirely unseen, transforming the very heart of the home into a fortress for freedom. Their involvement fundamentally changed the character of the Clocktower Pact, making it not just a rebellion of public acts, but a quiet, pervasive revolution nurtured in the everyday lives of the people. The rebellion's war chest was not filled with gold, but with copper scraps and quiet promises. While the Empire taxed its subjects into submission, the Clocktower Pact perfected a different kind of economy, one built on solidarity and stealth. Their most powerful weapon was a simple, collective refusal. They organized widespread boycotts of official imperial markets, places where the state levied heavy taxes on every transaction. Instead, a shadow network emerged. Farmers would bring their grain to a secluded barn at night, where pact members would distribute it directly to families, bypassing the imperial granaries entirely. Artisans traded tools and cloth in back alleys, using a barter system that left no financial records for the empire to track. This silent strike did more than save people money. It starved the imperial coffers and proved that the community could sustain itself. Essential supplies for the resistance, however, required a more daring approach. The Bellsmiths needed bronze for their secret castings, and the Orators required parchment for their scrolls. Imperial agents guarded the official sources of these materials with intense scrutiny, so the Pact created its own clandestine trade routes. A fisherman's boat, supposedly carrying a catch to a neighboring town, would have ingots of donated scrap metal hidden beneath the nets. A traveling tinker's cart, jangling with pots and pans, concealed precious reams of parchment within a false compartment. Every piece of metal and every sheet of paper was a testament to the network's reach, smuggled past checkpoints under the guise of mundane commerce. Funding these dangerous operations demanded both ingenuity and absolute trust. This led to the creation of the silent tax, a voluntary contribution system that operated on a simple, powerful principle. Supporters who could afford it would set aside a small portion of their earnings each week. A baker might contribute a few coins folded into a loaf of bread passed to a regular customer. A blacksmith might donate a portion of the payment from a special job. There were no demands or threats, only a shared understanding that these resources were the lifeblood of their collective hope. The funds were used for critical needs, from bribing a low-level official to look the other way, to purchasing safe passage for a hunted orator across the border. Managing this secret treasury was a constant high-stakes challenge. The Pact's quartermasters used encrypted ledgers, where a column of seemingly innocent grocery expenses actually detailed payments to smugglers. An entry for 10 pounds of flour might secretly represent 10 gold coins paid for a shipment of bronze. The resources themselves were never kept in one place. Coins were sewn into mattresses, buried in gardens, and hidden in church offering boxes. A single, centralized vault would have been a catastrophic risk, so they turned the entire community into their bank, decentralizing their wealth to protect it. This intricate system of economic sabotage and resource management did more than just fund operations. It slowly strangled the empire's local control. By creating their own self-sufficient economy, the Pact demonstrated a stunning autonomy, proving that true power was not just in loud defiance, but in the quiet, collective choice to withhold support and build something new from the ground up. Sourcing bronze was an act of quiet theft. The Empire tightly controlled the flow of copper and tin, the essential metals for bell making, forcing the Bellsmiths to become masters of creative acquisition. They melted down imperial coins, carefully filed into unrecognizable slivers over time. They retrieved old cooking pots and household idols donated by sympathetic families, whispering thanks for the sacrifice. Sometimes a Pact member working on an imperial construction site would report a bronze fitting or a decorative plaque as lost or damaged in transit, secretly redirecting the material to a hidden forge. Every ingot was a small victory, a piece of the state's own authority repurposed for its downfall. But casting a bell in secret presented an even greater challenge, the need to hide the very process of creation. The roar of a furnace and the billowing plume of smoke were beacons for the sound wardens. In response, the Bellsmiths engineered clandestine foundries that were marvels of subterranean design. They dug deep pits, lining them with fire-resistant stone, and constructing elaborate ventilation tunnels that channeled smoke through natural rock fissures or dispersed it through the chimneys of legitimate bakeries. To muffle the telltale ring of hammer on metal, they crafted thick, multi-layered molds from special sound-dampening clays mixed with horsehair and straw. The casting process itself became a silent, slow-moving ritual, conducted under the cover of night when ambient sounds could mask their work. Expert metallurgists today point to the Bellsmiths' ledgers with admiration. The artisans were not just casting bells, they were composing them. By minutely adjusting the ratio of tin to copper, they could precisely control the bell's voice. A bell with a higher tin content produced a brighter, more piercing tone that could cut through the noise of a bustling city. A bell with more copper created a warmer, deeper sound that carried for leagues across open countryside. This was the heart of their acoustic code, a secret language spoken through harmonic overtones. The most ingenious example of this adaptability was the whisper bell. This was no monumental tower bell, but a small, handheld instrument, often disguised as a traveler's shrine bell or a wealthy merchant's dinner chime. Cast from a special, brittle alloy, it produced a very high-pitched, short-lived tone that was difficult for Imperial listeners to pinpoint over long distances. In the narrow, echoing streets of a city, however, that sharp ping was perfect. One tap could mean a patrol is turning the corner. Two could signal all clear. It was a tool for instant, hyper-local communication, proving that their revolutionary craft could be as subtle and nimble as the spoken word itself. In their hands, the science of metallurgy became an art of rebellion, each carefully tuned chime a testament to human ingenuity in the face of absolute control. A wedding toast could sound like pure celebration, yet carry a devastating political critique. Orators became masters of this layered speech, turning every public gathering into a potential stage for their coded messages. They perfected the double entendre, a phrase with two meanings, one innocent and one deeply subversive. At a noble's wedding, a toast to the bride and groom's long and prosperous union might secretly be a call for endurance in the face of imperial taxes. A seemingly pious sermon about a humble shepherd gathering his lost flock could be a detailed instruction for finding a new safe house in the hills. The empire's agents, listening at the back of the church or the edge of the feast, would hear only harmless tradition, while the initiated received their vital instructions. This intellectual guerrilla warfare demanded not just clever words, but meticulous choreography. The orators developed sophisticated crowd dispersal techniques. A speaker might have a young apprentice stationed at a nearby window holding a simple toy. If the child suddenly began spinning a colored top, it meant imperial patrols were approaching. The orator would then seamlessly transition their allegory into a bland, state-approved fable, while the crowd, trained to recognize the shift, would calmly and quietly disperse in every direction, melting back into the daily life of the city before the guards even arrived. Children were often used as decoys, instructed to stage a loud, fake fight near a checkpoint to draw the guards' attention away from a clandestine meeting happening just meters away. Recovered fragments from a training manual for novice speakers emphasize this physical deception. One passage advises, let your shoulders slump and your hands remain open and empty. Speak not to the crowd, but as if you are merely thinking aloud to yourself. The goal was to project an image of harmless eccentricity, making the speaker appear as a non-threatening storyteller rather than a political firebrand. This cultivated innocence was their best armor. The most legendary example of this practiced deception was Orator Finn. Hunted by the Sound Wardens for his influential speeches, he was cornered in a market square with no clear escape. Instead of running, he leaned into a carefully constructed persona. He began to cackle and wave his arms, reciting what sounded like pure nonsense verse about dancing badgers and a moon made of cheese. The wardens, scoffing, dismissed him as the village madman and moved on. But to the butcher and the baker listening closely, the number of dancing badgers and the specific type of cheese mentioned were the precise coordinates for that night's emergency meeting. Finn's performance demonstrated the ultimate evolution of the orator's art, where survival itself depended on the ability to hide a razor-sharp message inside a cloak of calculated foolishness. These techniques required immense intellectual creativity, a constant game of mental chess with the regime. They proved that defiance did not always require a shouted slogan. It could be a wink in a toast, a child's game, or the mad ramblings of a poet, turning the most mundane interactions into profound acts of courage. Art began to speak in a language the Empire could not censor. While public monuments celebrated imperial power, a hidden renaissance flourished in the private spaces of manors and monasteries, all inspired by the Clocktower Pact. Weavers, illuminators, and playwrights became silent partners in the rebellion, embedding the spirit of defiance into the very fabric of their culture. Tapestries that hung in great halls ostensibly depicted pastoral scenes, but to a knowing eye, the central motif was always a bell tower, its silhouette woven into the branches of a great oak or reflected in a quiet river. Illuminated manuscripts, painstakingly crafted by scribes, contained coded references to famous orator speeches. The first letter of a psalm might be illustrated with a scene from Elarra's parable of the deep-rooted tree, a subtle nod to resilience that escaped the notice of imperial censors. This visual code allowed the Pact's ideology to circulate among the educated elite, turning art into a secret handshake. The most daring form of this cultural resistance was the shadow play. Staged in cellars or forest clearings with only a single lantern for light, these performances were a masterful blend of the Pact's core strengths. Actors used precise bell chimes, often produced by a small, handheld whisper bell just offstage, as their primary cues. A single, clear chime might signal a character to begin a monologue about freedom, while two quick rings would prompt the villain, always a thinly veiled imperial official, to enter. The stories were simple allegories of clever animals outsmarting a cruel hunter or a gentle stream persevering against a mighty dam. Yet for the audience, the experience was electric. The marriage of the visual story with the authoritative sound of the bell created a powerful, multi-sensory ritual that reinforced their shared cause, proving that a story told in shadows could be brighter than any imperial decree. Music, too, became a vessel for preservation. Folk songs that had once been simple ballads of love and loss were rewritten to incorporate the Pact's secret language. The rhythm of the lyrics often mimicked the staccato patterns of the harvest code, and the chorus would include pauses where the listeners would mentally insert the sound of a specific bell chime. A song about a blacksmith's daughter might have a verse where the hammer falls in a sequence of 3 quick beats and 2 slow ones, the exact pattern that signaled a safe route through the hills. By singing these songs while working in the fields or rocking their children to sleep, communities effortlessly memorized and transmitted the rebellion's operational signals, turning daily life into a continuous rehearsal for resistance. The music ensured the Pact's methods were not just remembered, but felt in the very bones of the people. Perhaps the most comprehensive artistic testament was the Liberty Triptych, a series of 3 small paintings circulated secretly among the Pact's most trusted supporters. The left panel showed a bellsmith's hands stained with soot, gently holding a newly cast bell. The central panel depicted a vibrant, living tree, its roots sprawling deep beneath a city, mirroring the Orator's allegory. The right panel showed these 2 elements united, with sound waves from the bell flowing down to nourish the roots. There were no explicit calls to arms, no denunciations of the Empire. Instead, the triptych visually captured the Pact's entire philosophy, the symbiotic relationship between the enduring symbol and the living word. To possess one of these paintings was to hold a sacred compact, a silent affirmation of belief that was both beautiful and deniable. This cultural output did more than spread information. It transformed abstract principles into a shared identity, ensuring the movement's heart continued to beat loudly in the silence. Gregor's hands were said to understand bronze the way a sailor understands the sea. He was the Pact's most brilliant artisan, a man whose name became whispered with reverence around hidden forges. His legendary skill lay not in casting the loudest bell, but in engineering the most precise ones, instruments whose voices could travel incredible distances, yet remain a secret to the Empire's untrained ears. His personal journals, smuggled out after his capture, reveal a profound sense of duty. He wrote that a bell cast for mere decoration was an empty vessel, but one forged for justice became a living soul in metal. This moral imperative drove his every calculation. He mastered the natural landscape, turning entire valleys into his collaborators. By studying the wind patterns and rock formations, he designed bells that would ring at a specific frequency, one that would catch in a distant canyon and bounce forward, creating a natural echo chamber. To an Imperial soldier standing in a village below, the sound was a faint, almost inaudible hum. But to a Pact member waiting on the next ridge, it was a clear, unmistakable message, a voice carried on the very bones of the land. This genius made him the most wanted man in the province. His capture was a devastating blow. Sound wardens, acting on a rare tip, surrounded his forest workshop at dawn. They dragged him away in chains, and the Empire publicly celebrated, believing they had broken the rebellion's backbone. But Gregor's mind was his greatest tool. He had spent a lifetime listening to the sounds of confinement, the clang of iron doors and the march of guard patrols. In his cell, he noted a loose stone in the wall that resonated at a particular pitch when struck. Using a scrap of metal from his meager meals, he patiently worked that stone, not to break it but to tune it. One night, during a change of the guard, he struck the stone in a sequence that mimicked the official all-clear signal. The echo in the prison corridor confused the new sentry, who momentarily abandoned his post to investigate. In that brief window of misdirection, Gregor slipped past two other checkpoints using a ventilation shaft he had mapped in his mind. His escape was not just a physical flight, it was an intellectual triumph, a final, brilliant application of his acoustic science. News of his audacious return to the Resistance spread like wildfire, transforming him from a captured man into a living legend. His story became the ultimate proof that no cage could truly hold their spirit, inspiring a new generation of artisans to pick up their hammers with renewed courage, ensuring that his work and the purpose behind it would ring on. Lysandra's voice was a carefully tuned instrument of revolution. Where Gregor spoke through bronze, she wove defiance from the very air, her words carrying the weight of an entire movement. As the daughter of a classical scholar, she had grown up surrounded by scrolls of ancient rhetoric, learning the structures of Socratic dialogue and the emotional power of Aristotelian appeals. This was not just academic knowledge, it was a strategic arsenal. She adapted these classical forms for the Resistance, turning philosophical questioning into a tool for covert action. In a quiet conversation with a hesitant merchant, she would not command him to help. She would ask a series of pointed questions. Why do you think the Empire fears our stories? What happens to a town when its people no longer speak to one another? Her questions were designed to provoke critical thinking, leading her listeners to arrive at the necessary conclusions themselves, making the commitment to the Pact feel like their own idea, not an order. This intellectual approach made her one of the Pact's most vital coordinators. her strategic mind planning complex operations with the precision of a general. Her most famous narrow escape demonstrated this brilliance under pressure. Carrying a scroll detailing a new network of safe houses, she found her usual route blocked by a sudden Imperial checkpoint. The guards were inspecting every passerby. Without a moment's hesitation, Lysandra transformed. She smeared dirt on her face, tore the hem of her cloak, and began to weep uncontrollably, becoming a grieving widow returning from her husband's burial plot. She clutched the vital intelligence not as a hidden scroll, but as a folded prayer for the dead, which she pressed to her heart, sobbing so convincingly that the flustered guards waved her through with hurried sympathy. It was a masterful performance, proving that the greatest weapon in her arsenal was a deep understanding of human nature. Beyond her daring, Lysandra served as the Pact's essential diplomat. The alliance between pragmatic bellsmiths and passionate orators was not always smooth. Disputes flared over resource allocation, the risks of certain public speeches, and the pace of their actions. In these tense moments, Lysandra was the mediator. She would listen for hours, then reframe their conflicts not as battles of will, but as different facets of the same goal. She reminded the bellsmiths that a bell without a message was just noise, and she assured the orators that a message without a safe, resonant voice was just a thought. Her words built bridges of respect, maintaining the fragile unity that held their entire world together. Her story is a profound reminder that the most enduring power often lies not in the sword, but in the syllable, not in the force of a blow, but in the force of an idea perfectly spoken at the perfect time. Imperial agents finally located the heart of the rebellion's voice. In the autumn of 1142, a coordinated raid descended upon 3 hidden bell forges nestled in the northern hills. The Empire had not just found workshops, they had discovered a central hub of the Pact's entire communication network. The sound of splintering wood and shattering clay molds replaced the rhythmic hammering as Imperial guards systematically destroyed every anvil, every furnace, and every precious half-finished bell. Several key bellsmiths were dragged away in chains, their knowledge and skill now imprisoned. The immediate consequence was a devastating silence. For the first time in years, the intricate web of bell signals that had connected towns and villages fell utterly quiet. The rebellion was deaf and blind. Fear, cold and sharp, spread through the ranks. Whispers of betrayal poisoned the air. Had someone talked, was the pact compromised from within? The alliance between the cautious bellsmiths and the exposed orators strained to its breaking point, each faction eyeing the other with suspicion. In a desperate bid to hold everything together, the remaining leadership called an emergency meeting in a cavern behind a thundering waterfall, the roar of water masking their frantic debate. They had to face a painful new reality. Their old strategy was in ruins. They could no longer rely on a grand network of bells. They had to become smaller, more decentralized, and more cunning than ever before. It was in this moment of profound disarray that the orators' true power shone. With the bells silenced, they became the sole keepers of the rebellion's spirit. They moved through the frightened communities, not with grand speeches, but with quiet, purposeful whispers. They spread a carefully crafted rumor, a story that Gregor's ghost was seen walking the hills, guiding the remaining smiths. They told of a dream where a single, unbreakable bell was buried deep beneath the earth, waiting for its time to ring. These stories were not lies, they were medicine for a wounded movement, a narrative of hope engineered to combat despair. While the orators fought the psychological battle, the surviving bellsmiths faced a monumental physical task. With their primary forges gone and metal supplies severed, they had to rebuild from almost nothing. They fragmented into tiny, isolated cells, setting up miniature workshops in root cellars and abandoned mine shafts. They became scavengers, melting down every piece of scrap metal they could find, from old door hinges to broken plowshares. A diary entry from a member named Ilara, preserved on a scrap of parchment, captures the grim determination of those days. She wrote, "The silence is temporary, but our resolve is eternal. We work by candlelight, our faces smudged with soot and hope, casting not great bells but tiny seeds of sound. Each small chime we create now is a promise to the future." This crisis, which had nearly broken them, instead forged a deeper, more resilient bond. The Bellsmiths learned to trust the Orators' invisible work of morale, and the Orators gained a new respect for the sheer, stubborn perseverance required to bend metal back into a voice. They emerged from the catastrophe not as a fractured alliance, but as a single, unified organism, hardened by loss and more determined than ever to fill the silence. The echoes of the Clocktower Pact did not fade with the medieval era. They simply found new instruments. Today, the principles of coded communication and decentralized unity are reborn in modern protest movements, proving that the struggle for a public voice evolves but never truly changes. Historians now trace a direct line from the Pact's secret networks to the structures of later secret societies, groups that organized against oppression using the same cell-based models to protect their members and amplify their impact. The core ideas of non-violent coordination and cultural preservation remain as vital now as they were then. Consider how contemporary environmental activists operate. They do not just carry signs, they stage elaborate performances, turning public squares into temporary forests or rivers of blue fabric. These acts are modern allegories, much like Ilara's parable of the deep-rooted tree, using powerful imagery to communicate complex ecological truths in a way that is both unforgettable and shareable. The clandestine trade routes of the medieval pact have their parallel in the digital shadows of today. Activists now use social media algorithms as their acoustic landscape, embedding coded messages in viral memes or using specific hashtags that function like the Pact's harvest code, signaling urgent news or safe gathering points to a global audience while often evading automated censorship. A striking example of this living legacy is the Bell of Freedom, a modern replica based on Gregor's designs that has appeared in demonstrations across the world. Its clear, resonant chime is not just a sound, it is a symbol connecting the tangible defiance of the past with the digital struggles of the present. This continuity reminds us that the most powerful resistance is often built not on force, but on the timeless human capacities for creativity, unity, and the irrepressible need to be heard. The Pact's greatest achievement was to blueprint a form of defiance that could outlive any single era, whispering across the centuries that silence is a condition, but it is never a final answer. Metal does not lie, and the earth remembers. For centuries, the Clocktower Pact existed only in whispered stories and fragmented scrolls, a legend many historians dismissed as folklore. That changed when archaeologists unearthed a collection of broken bell fragments from a sealed cellar. These were not ordinary pieces. Each bore faint, intricate inscriptions around its lip, not of saints or imperial crests, but of interlocking gears and stylized sound waves. When researchers compared these markings to the descriptions in the recovered Orator scrolls, they found a perfect match. The scrolls spoke of bells marked with the symbol of unity, and here was the physical proof etched in enduring bronze. This was the first tangible evidence that the secret alliance was not just a story, but a meticulously organized operation. To locate the spaces where this defiance was forged, scientists employed ground-penetrating radar. They scanned the foundations of old clock towers and the earth beneath forgotten manor houses. The radar revealed hidden voids and anomalous structures invisible to the naked eye. Beneath one such tower, they found the remains of a concealed room, its walls thickened with extra stone to muffle sound, its ventilation shaft cleverly disguised as part of the building's main chimney flue. These were not random architectural quirks. They were deliberate adaptations designed to hide a revolution in plain sight. Expert analysis provided the final, crucial layer of verification. Carbon dating of charcoal from a hidden forge pit placed its use squarely in the middle of the 12th century, directly aligning with the Pact's most active period. Analysis of the unique bell metal alloys with their high silver content confirmed they were crafted from scavenged and donated materials, just as the guild ledgers described. This scientific evidence transformed the oral histories from compelling narratives into credible historical records. Yet, interpreting these findings is a complex puzzle. How do you distinguish a pact-related object from a conventional medieval item? A common cooking pot could have been used to melt metal for a bell. A child's rhymes scratched onto a piece of slate might be a school lesson, or it could be a practice cipher for the Orator's code. This is where interdisciplinary collaboration becomes essential. Linguists analyze the syntax of recovered messages, metallurgists trace the provenance of unusual alloys, and historians cross-reference everything with imperial tax records and construction logs. It is a painstaking process of connecting tiny, scattered dots across the vast canvas of the past. This hard-won evidence does more than just validate the Pact's existence. It illuminates the fundamental mechanics of how resistance movements operate under the nose of overwhelming power. It shows us that defiance is not always a loud public shout. Sometimes it is a symbol scratched onto the inside of a bell, a room hidden within a room, and a story so resilient it waits centuries in the dark for someone to listen. Fear was a constant companion, a chill in the shadows that never fully went away. To endure the psychological toll of living a double life, Pact members developed intricate mental and emotional defenses, turning their shared struggle into a source of profound inner strength. They created small, vital rituals to reinforce their identity. Before a clandestine meeting, members would not just exchange a password. They would place their hands together over a single, unlit candle, a silent vow that their collective spirit was the true flame that could not be extinguished. These acts were not empty gestures. They were psychological anchors in a sea of imperial pressure, reaffirming their purpose and reminding each individual that they were part of something far larger than themselves. The very act of creating and hearing the forbidden bells provided a crucial psychological boost. For the bellsmith, the process of transforming raw, scavenged metal into a vessel of secret sound was an assertion of control in a world designed to strip it away. Each strike of the hammer was a defiance of the edicts meant to silence them. For the listener in a field or a quiet home, the distant, coded chime was more than a signal. It was an auditory proof that they were not alone. That specific sound, understood only by them, was a direct message of solidarity, a reminder that their agency persisted even under the Empire's nose. This aligns with psychological theories of collective efficacy, where a group's shared belief in its ability to achieve goals becomes a powerful motivator. The Pact's entire communication system was engineered to generate this feeling, successfully decoding a message, whether from a bell's sequence or an orator's allegory, created a small but significant surge of empowerment. It was a shared mental victory, a moment of clarity and connection that cut through the fog of fear and isolation. This process fostered a powerful sense of belonging, transforming abstract membership in a cause into a tangible, intellectual partnership. Personal accounts from recovered diaries speak to the exhausting reality of this dual existence. One young member wrote of the constant strain, describing how he had to wear a mask of bland compliance from sunrise to sunset, all while his mind was racing, listening for the next signal, watching for the next sign. He confessed to moments of deep despair, wondering if the fear would ever end. Yet, in the same entry, he detailed how the Pact's support network saved him. When he showed a subtle sign of distress, a fellow weaver, who was also a member, would casually invite him to help carry a heavy bolt of cloth. In the privacy of the back room, no grand speeches were made, just a shared moment of silence and an understanding nod. That simple, unspoken recognition was enough to restore his resolve. This exploration into their inner world reveals that the most critical resistance often happened not in the forge or the secret meeting, but within the human mind. The Pact's longevity depended on this intricate interplay between individual resilience and collective care, proving that a movement's true fortitude is measured by its ability to nourish the spirit as surely as it plans its actions. The Empire knew that crushing the Pact required more than chains and dampeners. It demanded the conquest of belief itself. A sophisticated propaganda machine began to churn, crafting insidious narratives designed to poison the public mind against the resistance. Imperial criers spread rumors that the secretive bell chimes were not signals but curses, their unnatural frequencies summoning plagues upon livestock and blighting crops. They whispered that the Orators were not patriots, but heretics who trafficked with dark, unseen forces, using their silver tongues to lead the righteous into damnation. These lies were not random, they were meticulously engineered to exploit the deepest fears of a medieval populace, turning the Pact's symbols of hope into omens of terror. The state amplified these fabrications through terrifying public spectacles. In town squares, they staged elaborate mock trials where terrified, broken individuals, often tortured into compliance, would publicly confess to being Pact members. These coerced performances detailed absurd crimes, from poisoning wells with sound to stealing children's souls through folktales. The goal was not justice, but theater, a brutal display meant to instill a visceral fear of association. To anyone even considering support, the message was clear. This is what happens to those who defy the silence. State-sponsored art became another weapon in this psychological war. Where Pact sympathizers wove subtle symbols into their tapestries, Imperial artists created garish posters and statues depicting bellsmiths as hunchbacked, demonic figures forging instruments of torture, and orators as grotesque, serpent-tongued creatures. These images were plastered on public buildings, a constant visual assault that sought to strip the resistance of its humanity and recast its members as monstrous, subhuman threats to the social order. For a time, these tactics were brutally effective. The constant barrage of lies sowed deep doubt and suspicion, fracturing communities. A neighbor's strange behavior could now be interpreted as evidence of dark pacts, and a mysterious bell chime could spark panic instead of solidarity. The Empire successfully externalized its own violence, making the victims of its oppression appear as the cause of society's ills. Yet this strategy contained the seeds of its own downfall. The imperial narrative was too monolithic, too desperate. As the same exaggerated claims of plagues and demons failed to materialize, people began to question the official story. They saw that the only real suffering came from imperial taxes and arrests, not from phantom curses. The sheer brutality of the mock trials, the obvious pain of the forced confessions, eventually bred more revulsion than compliance. The grotesque state art, lacking any subtlety, began to feel like a clumsy lie. The propaganda war ultimately underscored a timeless truth that while fear can control behavior for a time, it cannot forever suppress the human instinct to seek out what it knows deep down to be real. The Empire controlled the loudspeakers, but the Pact, through its quiet, consistent actions, was nurturing a far more powerful currency: trust. Their most precious possessions were not gold or jewels, but words etched in secret ink and memories held in trust. To ensure their struggle was not forgotten, the Pact created a clandestine library, a living archive designed to outlast any single member. This was a monumental task of preservation, a quiet war against imperial erasure. They developed ingenious methods to hide their history in plain sight. Encrypted ledgers, filled with columns of seemingly mundane household expenses, were actually detailed accounts of meetings and resource allocations. A large payment for lamp oil might secretly represent funds for a new bell mold, while an entry for a new wool cloak could denote the safe passage of a key orator. These books were kept in false-bottomed chests, hidden beneath grain or linens, their true value disguised as everyday drudgery. Alongside these written records, they cultivated a tradition of oral history. Specific individuals, known as memory keepers, were entrusted with the most sensitive narratives. These were not just people with good recall, they were living libraries, trained from youth to memorize vast tracts of information, from the technical schematics for a specific bell's harmonic profile to the full, unedited transcripts of Lysandra's most powerful speeches. This dual system, part written and part spoken, created a resilient safeguard. If the Imperial Guards found and destroyed the physical records, the stories lived on in the minds of the keepers. If a memory keeper was captured, the written word endured elsewhere. The contents of these archives were breathtaking in their scope. They held not just dry minutes, but vivid descriptions of debates held in flickering candlelight, capturing the very emotion of the moment. There were precise technical drawings for bells, showing the exact curvature and thickness needed to produce a specific secret overtone. Most importantly, they preserved the full texts of the coded allegories and speeches, ensuring that the intellectual heart of their movement, the arguments for freedom and unity, could be studied and understood by future generations. This was not vanity, it was a profound act of faith in a future they might not live to see. Protecting this knowledge required constant movement. The archives were never static. On a predetermined schedule or at the first sign of danger, the cache would be moved. A farmer's cart carrying turnips to a remote monastery would also be carrying a chest of scrolls left in the care of a sympathetic scribe. Other times, records were sealed in clay jars, treated with wax to repel moisture, and buried in unmarked locations, becoming literal time capsules meant for a future they hoped would be free. This endless, careful migration of knowledge was a testament to their dedication, a silent, ongoing mission to protect their truth. Centuries later, this foresight paid off in ways they could never have imagined. With the discovery of these hidden caches and the painstaking collection of the last surviving oral traditions, historians and data scientists have begun a grand digital reconstruction. They are scanning fragile parchment, cross-referencing the decrypted ledgers with the spoken histories, and using software to map the connections between people, events, and locations. This digital archive is allowing us to piece together a comprehensive timeline of the Pact's activities, transforming scattered fragments into a coherent narrative. We can now trace the journey of a single bell from its casting in a hidden forge to its role in a specific protest years later. These preservation efforts, born of necessity and nurtured by unwavering resolve, ensured that the legacy of their resistance could not be erased. They understood that a movement could be scattered and its members silenced, but if its story survives, its spirit remains eternally alive, waiting for the right moment to ring out once more. A church bell's call to prayer became the perfect disguise for rebellion. The Empire could not outlaw faith itself, so the Clocktower Pact learned to weave its signals into the sacred rhythms of daily life. Sympathetic clergy who saw the imperial silence as a sin against the communal spirit became vital allies. They turned their parishes into havens, using the predictable schedule of mass to mask clandestine gatherings. When the great bell tolled to mark the elevation of the host, its specific sequence of rings layered over the ritual might also signal that a shipment of forbidden scrolls had arrived safely in the crypt below. This fusion of the holy and the subversive gave their actions an unassailable moral cover, framing their defiance not as treason but as a divine duty. They adapted spiritual texts to justify their civil disobedience, finding powerful ammunition in ancient verses. A well-known passage about obeying earthly authorities was quietly countered with another about obeying God rather than men. The story of the prophet Nathan confronting King David was retold as an allegory for speaking truth to power, providing a sacred precedent for their resistance. This theological framework transformed their activism from a political struggle into a spiritual crusade, granting them immense moral authority that resonated deeply in a pious society. The most potent symbol of this alliance was the sanctuary bell. In a remote chapel, a specific, rapid pealing of the bell during a quiet afternoon was not a call to service. It was a desperate signal that imperial guards were pursuing a fugitive member. Upon hearing it, the entire village knew their part. The blacksmith would drop his hammer and head to the tavern to cause a distraction. The baker's wife would leave her back gate unlocked, and inside the church the priest would swiftly hide the fugitive within a secret compartment behind the altar, then stand calmly at the door, invoking the ancient law of sanctuary. He would argue with the arriving guards that the church was holy ground, a place of peace beyond the emperor's reach. This strategic use of religious immunity saved countless lives, turning stone and stained glass into a shield for the resistance. How could the Empire arrest a man for ringing a church bell or storm an altar without sparking widespread outrage? This spiritual dimension did more than provide tactics. It offered a shared ethical language that united entire communities. It reassured a fearful populace that their quiet acts of defiance were not just brave but righteous. The Pact's fight was no longer just for their voice, but for their very soul, a battle blessed by the silence of the bells they refused to let fall completely quiet. The secret language of the bells did not fade when the Empire fell. It seeped into the very soil of the local tongue. The Pact's coded communication left an indelible mark on regional dialects, transforming everyday speech into a vessel for a hidden history. Linguistic studies of recovered texts reveal how specific bell signals became common phrases, their original urgency softening into metaphor over generations. The term clear chime, once a precise signal confirming a safe route or an honest message, evolved into a colloquial expression for speaking the truth. To say someone's words had the ring of a clear chime was to affirm their integrity. Conversely, a muffled toll, which originally warned of imperial patrols or a compromised safe house, became a way to describe hidden danger or deceitful advice. A villager might still say a dubious merchant's offer comes with a muffled toll, a linguistic fossil of that era of suspicion. This enrichment of the vernacular created a dialect rich with double meaning, where conversations could operate on two levels, one mundane and one echoing with the memory of resistance. The Orator's genius extended to crafting intricate mnemonics based on bell sequences, turning complex messages into unforgettable songs and rhymes. A five-tone pattern signaling a specific mountain pass might be remembered through a simple verse about 5 blackbirds flying to an oak tree. These rhythmic aids allowed vital information to be preserved and transmitted purely through oral tradition, ensuring that even the illiterate could be walking libraries of the rebellion's map. This practice fundamentally shaped local folklore, with many traditional ballads and children's counting rhymes containing the ghostly rhythm of those old secret chimes. Modern linguists tracing these patterns have found that the most persistent idioms are those tied to universal human experiences, safety, trust, and warning. The Pact's linguistic legacy demonstrates a profound truth that when a people are forbidden to speak freely, their struggle for a voice can reshape their language, embedding the story of their defiance into the very syllables their descendants used to buy bread or greet a neighbor. The fight against silence did not just use words, it permanently changed them, proving that resistance can echo for centuries in the grammar of the everyday. Imperial forces finally cornered the rebellion at the Silver Spire. This remote clock tower, perched on a windswept crag, had become the Pact's final bastion, its bells the last free voice in the northern provinces. The Empire moved at first light, a silent tide of soldiers and siege engines encircling the base of the mountain. From the high windows, Pact lookouts watched the glint of sunlight on spear tips, their coded bell chimes reporting each tightening of the noose. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of cold stone and desperate resolve. Bellsmiths reinforced the heavy oak doors with leftover bronze plating, while orators prepared for a different kind of battle, one fought with words. They knew a direct assault was suicide, so they blended diplomacy with defiance, their strategy a final test of their core principles. Eyewitness accounts, preserved on scraps of vellum, describe how the tower's bells became the nervous system of their defense. A rapid, high-pitched sequence from a small handbell directed defenders to the southern wall where ladders were being raised. A deep, resonant toll from the great bell in the spire signaled a shift, calling everyone to fall back to the inner chambers. The sounds were not just commands, they were a reassurance to everyone inside that they were still a coordinated whole, that the Empire had not yet severed their connection. The Orators, led by Lysandra herself, attempted to negotiate with the Imperial commander from a high window. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she offered a surrender with conditions, a proposal that the artisans and speakers be taken into custody peacefully in exchange for the Empire's guarantee that the hidden archives and the names of their widespread sympathizers would remain untouched. It was a brilliant, desperate gamble, using the Empire's desire for a tidy victory as a shield to protect their legacy. The Empire's answer was a volley of flaming arrows. The siege had begun in earnest. For hours the defenders held, using boiling oil and dropped stones to repel assaults on the stairs, but the outcome was never in doubt. As the afternoon light began to fade and the sound of axes splintering the main door echoed through the tower, the order was given. It was not a call to fight, but a command to vanish. With the last of their strength, the Bellsmiths unleashed a final, chaotic symphony. Every bell in the spire rang out at once, a crashing, discordant, and beautiful wave of sound that rolled across the valleys. This was the scatter chime, a prearranged signal of absolute dissolution. To the Imperial soldiers, it was meaningless noise, but to every Pact member and sympathizer for miles around, it was a clear and heartbreaking instruction: burn your notes, hide your tools, and disappear into the silence. The cost was steep. Imperial records boast of capturing 24 key members, including several master bellsmiths who were paraded in chains. Many more were killed in the final assault on the tower. Yet, in the controlled chaos of the scatter chime, the heart of the Pact escaped. Lysandra, Gregor, and other core leaders used a forgotten escape route through the mountain's bedrock, a path revealed only when the final, specific resonance of the great bell caused a hidden stone door to swing inward. They slipped away into the growing darkness as the silver spire fell. Its physical form conquered, but its symbolic voice already carried away on the wind. The siege was a tactical defeat that forced the resistance into a deeper, more fragmented existence, but it also proved their spirit was unbreakable. They had chosen to scatter their physical form to preserve their immortal ideals, ensuring the Clocktower Pact would live on as a whisper, a story, and a promise. Their moral compass was forged from the same unyielding material as their bells. While the Empire ruled through fear and deception, the Clocktower Pact bound itself to a strict, unwritten code of honor, a set of ethical guidelines that became their ultimate source of strength. This code was not a suggestion. It was the bedrock of their alliance, and its first and most sacred principle was a complete prohibition of violence against civilians. No matter the provocation, they would not become the monsters they fought. They refused to use assassination as a tactic, understanding that murdering an imperial official would only give the state a legitimate reason to paint them as common terrorists and justify even greater brutality against the populace. Instead, they focused their energy on brilliantly symbolic acts designed to expose imperial hypocrisy. On one occasion, after the Empire publicly executed a man for possessing a forbidden scroll, the Pact did not retaliate with bloodshed. That night, they secretly replaced the imperial banners in the town square with beautifully woven tapestries depicting the very story the man had died for. The next morning, the citizens saw not a scene of vengeance, but a silent, powerful testament to the idea that a story could not be killed. This commitment to non-violence forced the populace to see the stark contrast between the Empire's cruelty and the Pact's restrained dignity, granting the resistance a moral authority that brute force could never achieve. Their code also demanded absolute truthfulness within their own coded communications. A lie told to a fellow member was considered a betrayal as grave as speaking to the Sound Wardens. This was a practical necessity, as their entire network relied on the flawless relay of complex information, where a single misinterpreted bell chime or allegory could lead to dozens of arrests. But it was also a profound ethical choice. In a world saturated with imperial lies, they built a miniature society where a person's word was their bond. This fostered an unshakable trust among the members, a certainty that the person next to you in the dark, risking their life, was operating from the same core of integrity. How was this strict code enforced? Not through threats, but through the powerful mechanism of communal accountability. Every member was a guardian of their shared ethics. If someone advocated for a more violent path or was caught in a deceit, the entire cell would confront the breach. The ultimate punishment was not execution, but expulsion. To be cast out of the pact was to be severed from the very community you were fighting for, a fate many considered worse than prison. This self-policing ensured that the alliance's integrity remained pristine, protecting it from corruption from within. This unwavering emphasis on honor is what truly distinguished the Clocktower Pact. It proved that in the long, shadowy struggle for justice, ethical conduct is not a weakness, but a formidable strategic weapon, one that builds legitimacy, nurtures trust, and ultimately forges a legacy that can endure long after the swords have rusted away. The story of the Clocktower Pact is far more than a forgotten chapter in a medieval ledger. It is a timeless blueprint for resistance, demonstrating how the union of craftsmen and communicators can forge a force that no single empire could ever fully silence. When the powerful tried to control the very air people breathed, this alliance proved that oppression, for all its strength, often breeds a more profound and cunning innovation. The human spirit, when denied its voice, will inevitably discover new languages, turning the silence imposed upon it into a canvas for its defiance. This ancient struggle resonates with a startling clarity in our modern world. We see its echo in the digital activist who uses encrypted code instead of a bell, and in the journalist who weaves truth into a narrative that bypasses official censorship. The Pact's legacy is a powerful reminder that the fight to be heard is never truly about the tools themselves, but about the unbreakable human need to connect, to share, and to express. Let this hidden history inspire you to see the potential for collaboration in your own challenges. Whether you are safeguarding free speech in your community, standing against smaller-scale injustices, or simply striving to make your own voice matter, remember the Bellsmiths and the Orators. Their story urges us to value our own voices and to never take for granted the profound power of a shared message. We would love to hear how you see these medieval strategies reflected in today's world. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you are captivated by these forgotten struggles, subscribe to explore more hidden histories that continue to shape our lives. For even in our quietest moments, if you listen closely, the echoes of their courage can still be felt, a persistent whisper reminding us that no silence is ever